Good evening, everybody. This is the Finance Committee. We have a quorum. It is 7:03, and I'm calling the meeting to order. Our first item of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Thank you all very much. Now, first on the agenda is a discussion with Mr. Callahan from the Community Preservation Committee, but if he doesn't mind, we're going to go vote on a couple warrant articles first, because I don't think they're going to take too much time. So we need, on our last meeting, we did all of the warrant articles except for recommendations on the CPC one, which we're going to talk about with Mr. Callahan a little bit later. And then we had, we need to do Articles 2 and then 6 through 9. So, Article 2, and our town manager, our esteemed town manager, is here to help walk us through any of these or answer any questions that we may have. So the first one is Article 2, which is the authorization of the town manager or superintendent of schools regarding contracts in excess of 3 years. So, Melissa, would you like to?
Absolutely. So this is an article that we've been voting on for I looked back, since 2003. And as you know, Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30B, governs how we buy items and solicit bids for services. What this does is give us the flexibility to enter longer contracts for items that get us better pricing. Typically, it's leases for things like our cell phone towers, things like trash contracts, transportation. One example from this year is the postage machine. So if we went ahead a 5-year contract, we were able to get better pricing, so we went with the 5-year contract. So anything that's over 3 years does require a vote of the select board or the school committee.
Great. Thank you very much. Anybody have any questions on that one? Could I entertain a motion from someone, perhaps?
I will move that we make a favorable or a
Yep.
recommended favorable action on Article 2.
Great, thank you. Do we have a second? Second. Thank you, Eva. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we will recommend favorable action on Article 2. The next one is Article 6, which is the acceptance of Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 59.5, Clause 17E, which is to see if the town will vote to accept that law I just referenced, which utilizes an annual increase in the asset whole estate limit for exemptions granted to senior citizens, surviving spouses, and surviving minors. Perhaps our esteemed town manager could give us a quick explainer on this one?
Sure. So Articles 6 through 9 are all local options that we're asking town meeting to accept. Article 6 is actually a $175 credit that goes to seniors that qualify, surviving spouses that qualify, and surviving minors that qualify. And what we're trying to do is actually increase the estate limits. So currently, if you have real estate, real or personal, that is valued at $30,000 or $28,000, you're no longer eligible for this exemption. Obviously, those are pretty low limits for assets. So what we're asking to do is just have this increased by COLA. Basically, DOR does it annually. The estimated impact of this is about $8,000, and it is funded through our overlay account.
Great, thank you. Anybody have any questions?
Do you know what the limit would be? Or would it change every year?
It will change annually.
Oh, okay.
Anybody else? All right, how about a recommendation or a motion?
I move we vote to
Favorably.
recommend acceptance of or favorable action on Article 6.
Great, can we do 6, 7, 8, and 9?
Do you want me to explain the rest of them?
Didn't you? Yes, that would, no, we can do one at a time,
You
that's
sure?
fine.
Okay.
Yep. So we have a second?
Second.
Great, thank you, Chris. Moved by Ken, seconded by Chris. All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? All right, now we can go to 7, sorry.
That's okay. Article 7 is senior citizens only. It's to also adopt a COLA adjustment. This COLA adjustment is actually using the Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Price Index. It applies not only to assets, but also to income. So currently, if your income is $15,000, if you're married, are $13,000. If you're single, you do not qualify for this. It's about a $500 tax abatement. And again, this one is actually, we're thinking about $8,000 as well, Frank, for the burden to the town.
Great. Anybody any questions on this one? Okay, how about a motion then?
For favorable action for Article 7.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you, Regina. Second by Regina. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it, so we will recommend favorable action on Article 7. How about Article 8?
Article 8 is a little bit different. It is also a local option, but what it would do would be to increase our current exemptions. So we currently have exemptions for blind people, for disabled veterans, for an elderly exemption, and we're looking to increase those. So currently, they range from about $400 to $1,500 a year. This would increase them from $800 to $2,000 a year. What town meeting would do is not only vote to accept the local option, but also vote to determine what our matching exemption would be. So you can go anywhere from 50% to 100%. We're recommending 100%. It's not reimbursed by the state, so again, it would be paid by the overlay account, and the impact is $75,000. In fiscal year '22, 120 people qualified for this exemption.
Great. Thank you.
Sorry, what did you say the impact was?
$75,000 funded through the overlay.
Okay.
Any additional questions? All right. I would certainly entertain a motion if someone is willing to make it.
I'll move that we recommend favorable action on Article 8.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Second by Nancy. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it. We will recommend favorable motion on that one. And our final one is Article 9.
Yeah, so Article 9 is a local option that would allow the town to abate real estate and personal property taxes for any member of the National Guard or a reservist who's on active duty in a foreign country on the year that they perform that service.
Great. Anybody have any questions on that one?
I just have a question on that one. So, is this something brand new, or is this something that comes up every year? 'Cause I don't remember this one before.
So this is a brand-new local option. We would have to accept it every 2 years if we did choose to accept it.
And then, and there's no time period attached to it, so if someone is, performing the service they have to be, the timing was just unclear to me from the warrant article. Is it as of December 31st? Is it if they are doing this service at any point during the year, even if it's for a week, so the timing was just a little unclear to me.
Yeah, so what would happen is that the Board of Assessors would actually create a criteria and requirements and
Okay.
determine how it would be, but it's usually for the whole year in which they perform the service is typically what you would see.
But
So
they
you'd have to
have-
be there typically for the entire year.
Okay.
And does this benefit exist for the other branches of the military?
I don't know of any other benefit like this. It is from Chapter 59. I actually read it over today to see if I missed something, and the only one that I see is the National Guard.
Massachusetts National
federal,
Guard
right.
versus a federal
Yeah.
branch of the military, perhaps.
Just a guess.
All right.
We don't have an idea on the impact of this one. It's going to change annually. We were trying to think if there was anybody who's activated right now that we know of, but the Veterans Director wasn't sure.
Okay. All right. Anybody have any additional questions?
Just one, all real estate taxes?
It's just real estate taxes. And
Just
but
the way it says real and personal property.
Yeah, so it's a little bit
But
interesting. So because I had the same question. I'm like, does it apply to commercial? Because if you think of personal property, really, typically you would think of commercial. It does not apply to commercial. So it is only for residential, and it would be any residential real personal property, which I can't even think of any, but if you had residential personal property, it would be included.
Thank you.
Is this something that most other towns do?
I think a lot of communities are doing it. Like I noticed that Tewksbury, my municipal nerdiness reviewing their warrant, that they were accepting a lot of the same exemptions this
Okay.
year. I think, one of the things that we hear from veterans and from seniors is that the taxes are difficult, and so we were looking for kind of creative ways to be able to alleviate that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's a good idea. Any other questions? All right.
I'll move that we recommend favorable action on Article 9.
Thank you, Regina. Second. Thank you, Keith. All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it. We will recommend favorable action on that one, too. Thank you, Melissa. I appreciate it. Okay, we're going to revert back to you, Mr. Callahan, if you don't mind. So I just want to first thank you for coming tonight. You are the new chair of the CPC, is that correct?
Yes.
Nice. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So just to set the table a little bit, I don't know if you were able to watch a replay of our last meeting. We were, I think the meeting prior to that, your predecessor at the CPC chairman's seat came in and explained everything, so that was very helpful. But when we went to discuss our recommendation on this particular article, there were some additional questions, so we wanted to bring you back, or not you back, but bring the chair back and see if we can have a further discussion on that, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's great.
So I think, I'll start off by saying, I think that the committee was generally all in the same place on most all of them, if not all, except for the restoration of the boundary wall project and the preservation of the barn at 419 Johnson Street. So I think, if anyone on the committee wants to start this off with a question, comment, concern, advice, counsel, wisdom to Mr. Callahan. I know none of you are shy or shrinking violets, and I know you all had questions.
There you go. I'll start.
All right.
About the barn, did the committee approach you before they decided to purchase the 5 acres to just say like, hey, we're purchasing these 5 acres, there's a structure on it, give an idea, is this something that qualifies, or did you get any heads up on it before the parcel was actually purchased? No. Okay. So you don't know, was it qualified, was it designated an historical structure before they purchased the property?
So the way to kind of think about it a little bit,
Okay.
and I've sat where you guys sit,
Yep.
and
No.
so, I think it's kind of interesting to just get a broader view.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit different because, as the CPC, we don't propose any projects.
I
We
know,
just take
I
what
know,
comes,
yeah.
what comes up in front of us, and we have to. We do our best to sort of understand how it fits and so forth and so on. So we looked at this pretty closely, and with a lot of purchases, these things come up and people take action. In other words, there's a parcel, it's for sale. Obviously the owner was motivated to sell it and had a specific purpose in mind and made an agreement to which we didn't know. We didn't know the details about what the owner was looking for or why they chose, that sale. We know what Ridgewood was looking for in terms of a land bank and so forth to be able to preserve the cemetery and have additional, land in the future. And we can understand where they, so we heard their story and we looked at it, sort of carefully. And we thought about it, pretty hard. And we definitely talked about it for a long time. The historical commission came back and said that the barn is historically significant. So that's something we look for before we approve anything that's historic. So we did go and kind of do our diligence and say, like, have you spoken to the Historic Commission? What do they think about this? And they said, yes, it is like we do not have lots of dairy barns left in North Andover. And so if we were to fund this project, we would condition that upon there being a historic preservation restriction being placed on that barn. So in other words, the money's going to the barn will be preserved in its historic state and structure and so forth, and will comply with any conditions that the Historic Commission puts upon it when they do that work. So, that was like level 1 of our analysis. And level 2 was to talk with Ridgewood and say, like, is that absolutely, the right number? And we did talk to them about, what can we do this year? And, try to say, like, okay, let's be really specific about what we're trying to get accomplished and make sure that it's all towards that goal of preserving the historic structure in terms of structural work and things to make sure that the building's, standing up and working for what they want to use it for, which is to store equipment, that they use at the cemetery that they have now on site in sort of temporary storage and so forth. So when we looked at that and we said, like, we know a lot about historic buildings because we get applications every year from historic buildings. And we know that one of the things about them is if they're not being used, they deteriorate very quickly. And so we thought like, hey, here's a structure, it's designated historic, and they have a use for it, which fits, So in other words, the barn will be able to stay in its historic state. They'll be able to use it for their purpose of storage and so forth. It'll be working to the extent that there are people in there, it won't deteriorate, it'll get the maintenance that it needs on an ongoing basis because it's in their interest to keep it in good shape. And we think this works, And then secondly, we talked to them about the number and said like, okay, let's see if we can refine this number and, and we also review, everything as it comes in, right? So we would fund it and we recommended favorable action for $205,000. But also when those bills come in, we got to sign off on them. So we would have to say, we get a look at it and we say, okay, this fits with the scope of the work that you applied for. This fits with the agreement that we have with you as an organization in terms of what you're going to do historically. And we think that this, it comes down to the chair saying like, okay, we'll sign off on this and the town can, and the town is involved too in both the application being turned from an application into an agreement, a funding agreement. And we would, have them involved to say like, okay, look, do you think this work complies with what was done in here? And we do. So we feel like we got to a good place with this in terms of the overall structure, the historic intent, the historic commission, and basically a plan that will, preserve the structure, And it's, like I said, you have to kind of come with what comes across the transom.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, like in terms of the highest and best use of this parcel, do I think that, does the committee think that maybe, there could be some other uses that might be more beneficial to the community? Certainly, I think a lot of us think, but, we're also not able to like make a bid on the house
Yeah.
and so forth.
No,
We had to go with that.
I completely understand that. You have to take a look at what comes before you. I mean, you don't put forth the applications, and actually, I don't really have any fault with like how you make your decision. It's very prescribed. I completely appreciate that. Part of me is just a little bit of an uncomfortableness of how much money goes towards the Ridgewood over all of these years. I
Right,
mean,
right,
the annual number is really gone up significantly in the last 5 years. The last 8 years, I don't think I'm off base. It's between $400,000 and $450,000 a year, annually. And it's like, wow, that's a lot of preservation for a cemetery. And even though you couldn't do this, I understand that. In my head, I'm thinking like, wow, wouldn't that be great for senior housing, or wouldn't that be great for? I could fill in a lot of slots, and I know that is not in your purview, so that's not really fair. For that. The other issue with the barn is, like, what kind of public access would that be? I mean, is this something that people could drive by and admire? I mean, it is, you're preserving something, but it's not just the preservation of it. It's like, what is the benefit to the community? Is it just that we have this thing?
Right.
Or can people come and look at it and see the historical significance, take tours, or there talks about like what it used to be used for, any of those things, and that doesn't really seem that that's going to happen. You're going to get a structure that's preserved, but it's for the benefit of the cemetery association. Fair. That's why they want to get this done, and good for them for applying it for for the funds. But I don't see a lot of benefit for the community.
Right.
The fact that it's an historical building. I mean, like we're surrounded by them. I totally get that. And they can't always all be preserved. That's
Right.
It is
Right.
just the nature of the beast. So those were my reservations.
Right.
So.
No, I mean, I think, Ridgewood has been very open, and if you look at historically what they've allowed in terms of, walking tours and access to the cemetery, they allow people to walk through the cemetery, just as a matter of course.
Of course, yes.
And so forth. So there's
Well,
certainly
all those
open access there.
beautiful roads,
and,
why not?
They have talked, it was an entirely sort of separate conversation around the fields, because we think it's, again, it's a longer term thing, right? Like this parcel isn't going to go away, and, and it's there, and, now it's out of the development process, and it's under the, the care and custody of Ridgewood, right? And so I think there'll definitely be some more talks about what we can do, but they certainly conveyed to us, and I don't want to muddy the waters in terms of, what the application actually said and what we're funding this year, but they certainly are open to, public access and different ways of using the land, both the barn and the surrounding land.
No, and-
Now, is it in a public spot where you can see it? No.
Yeah.
Like, you do have to, travel up there to see it. So it's not like, to give an example, it's not like the parish church. You
Right.
can see the steeple and it's preserved and you get to drive by it on a daily basis.
Right.
But it is, a historic dairy barn and kind of does speak
Yeah.
to the past. And I'm sure that, they would be amenable to, writing that into the agreement in terms
And I'm sure
of
they would too, but
stuff.
it's like, those things haven't always worked out in the past.
Right,
You know
right.
specifically that there are things that get funded and it just doesn't work out like you think.
But-
And
Right.
so when it's fuzzy, it's always fuzzy.
Mm-hmm.
That's all. So that's another discomfort on my part, is to have the like, well, we would like to do this. For the amount of money, I'd like to see something a little bit more concrete
Mm-hmm.
instead of just like that would be nice. Yes, it would be nice.
Right,
That doesn't,
right.
there's no voting
Yeah,
on that
and I
would be
mean,
nice.
and like,
So
and
I do appreciate where you're coming from. I
Right.
really do. But that, just expressing, this is what came up at the
Right,
last
right.
meeting, and
Yeah.
that's all.
no, and I mean, I've been on the committee for a while, and a lot of the reason why I got on the committee in the first place was to make sure that we were able to do these things.
Yep.
And some of the things I've learned is that, we fund product, we recommend the funding of a project, and we turn it over to town meeting, right?
Yes, right.
And town meeting is the ultimate legislative authority, and that's where the approval to spend the money comes from, not from our committee.
Right.
Right? Like, somebody could, theoretically, right, come up with a citizen's petition to
Yep.
fund a project out of whatever, and totally sidestep the entire committee,
Yep.
right? Like that's a possibility.
Yeah.
So, once that's left, you're right. It is a little bit unclear, but, we have found Bridgewood to be a good partner over the years in terms of doing this thing. And they have, learned the process very well
Yep.
and know how to carry out these steps. And we have found them to be, careful stewards of the funds we've appropriated to
Yeah.
them.
No argument
For
there.
preservation.
So just a question, when you were answering, you had said that this was deemed a historic building. It's identified as a building that has historic
No, so I wanna
significance,
be
but
really-
it doesn't have any
Right, so it's not on the,
classification right
it's
now
not
on
on the
any
National
register or
Historical,
anything like that. Right.
register or
Right.
anything like that. But what the Historic Commission has said is this is a building of historic significance within North Andover, as, their purview to say.
So, another question, I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay.
So does that mean, like, in theory, they could put this work into it and a year later tear it down? Or by the fact that it's designated as historic locally, even though it's not on a national register, means that they cannot do that?
Right, so what we would do is condition the funding on a historic conservation restriction. So in other words, when you're subject to that, we would say, like, you need to preserve these parts of the, you need to preserve the building in its original state. And I'd have to say, I don't know, I've read more easements than I have historical restrictions, but it's like, it needs to look like it does now. So you need to honor the basic construction methods and so forth and so on and preserve it. So that's the thing. Absent our stepping in to do this, they could. They own the barn and they could take the barn down and put up a garage, right? So we would, the historic, thing would, that we would work that out and it'd be, and, the town manager knows more about this than I do, but there would be an agreement and the historic restriction would be held by the Historic Commission and they would be able to, kind of supervise that and say oh, no, say they went for a building permit or something and said, we want to, put on X, Y, or Z, they would have purview over that to say that's not consistent with the restriction on that you accepted when you took the money.
Okay, and without doing this, there is no such restriction. It's
Right.
theirs to do other way. And does that restriction carry if they sell the property? Does it carry over to the
Yeah.
new owner?
Mhm.
Okay, okay. And then, if I can ask one more question, What is the balance in the account? So I'm trying to get a sense of whether by putting the money here, it's taking away from something else because the balance is really low, or is there like a large balance and you don't have it? I know you sort of have an issue with people not proposing enough is the sense I have, but it's $2 million for this year, 2.2, but what is the balance, carried over from prior years? How much money is there to ultimately be given out before the New Year's appropriation or allocation from property taxes?
So the real answer is about $6 million, 5.8 million.
'Cause I think
That
that's the
includes everything that's
perspective to it.
encumbered. So that, we have 15 million, but we have, we've approved applications for, about 8 million, and there's about 6 million left.
How much new goes in each year approximately?
Between 2 and 3 million.
Okay.
And Bill, this might be a good time if you could just explain again that the committee needs to spend a certain amount on each
Right.
bucket every year, right? So you're not taking away from something necessarily, right?
Right. At least 10% in each of the 3 categories.
There you go. Thank you.
So if we do renovate the barn,
No questions from the audience, Mr. Limper.
can I interrupt you, Stan? I'm sorry.
Just teasing.
So theoretically, you could see that they could come back year after year to say we need to, that the CPC would be funding the upkeep on the building.
Well, not maintenance, but if they had,
No, not maintenance.
Not
but,
maintenance,
but I
no.
mean, but it's a really old building. It's an old barn, and you
Right.
put this much money in, and it's like you get a new roof, and then next year it's just like, well, the corner posts or the foundation here, or
Be obligated.
no, they would not be obligated to. I'm just saying that this is, as you say, we have a great relationship with that organization. They're very good at coming. They know how the system works, and they have been taking advantage of something they should be taking advantage of. The CPC funds. I mean, actually, it's hard for me to even be critical because it's just like, hey, this is how we can get these things done. But I would be not at all surprised that would be a continuing request for, a very old building like this. I can't,
no, and I mean, and I
one
think
and done? Okay.
we have, one of the things we've done with Ridgewood, this project accepted, and the Housing Authority and other groups that, and the Fields Committee with playgrounds,
Yeah.
or just the whole idea of playgrounds, is to say, like, come to us with a master plan, so we
Yeah.
gave the Housing Authority $75,000, and they did a study and, rank ordered all the problems and so forth, and we've been very successful in sort of funding
Yeah,
that.
that
And
makes
so,
a lot
like,
of sense, yeah.
I would say, like, that's certainly a part of our messaging when we talk to groups like that, is
Yeah.
to say, like, hey, we don't want to be sort of like whack-a-mole every year.
Yeah.
Like, there's a leak here, there's a leak there. We would like you to give us a comprehensive view, and we can help you, because it's pennies on the dollar for engineering and architectural studies, right? To say, like, okay, what needs to be done? What's a rough order of magnitude estimate for how it would do, and how important are they? Rank order that, and then we can look at the list and sort of, be more strategic,
Yeah.
and help them be more strategic, because, a lot of these groups are they're volunteers.
Sure.
And, it's important to make sure that we're, that we're spending dollars wisely when we want to do that.
Yeah.
So
That makes
I would
sense.
say that, that's something that we do. It might be time for sort of a second, they did that for us once.
I was just going to ask that.
Yeah.
They did. Yeah.
They did. This isn't part of it, though. But
Okay.
they did.
Yeah.
Is there I don't think there is, but is there like a restriction or a rule that to request money from the CPC, you need to be either a part of the town, like a town group or a nonprofit, or can any individual raise a request for their own project that they have?
really old house.
Right, well, that's what I'm thinking, like, is there a concern?
No,
It
no, I
sounds
mean-
ridiculous, but is there a concern if there's someone
Right.
who has a piece of old, historically significant house on the common, says, oh, great, I'd like to upgrade my house?
No, I mean, I know we have not seen those projects. We've had probably more, we've had all nonprofits, coming to us. We have heard of other towns, like, from what I understand, Newburyport has had that, where people with houses, along 113 that are historic have asked for funds, and they've debated that. I don't think that we would, I think that's probably a question we need to answer at some point, but it hasn't come up in front of us, yet, in terms of a private
Yeah.
homeowner.
Because I think that's personally my biggest, I guess, concern is maybe even too strong of a word, but my just, thing that makes me think twice about this particular one is the fact that the public can't really benefit from it in any way if it's storing equipment. So it just feels like that's what our CPC fund should be used for, to benefit a broader group.
I mean,
But-
it is, I think it's really interesting because it does come back to that question of what's the use of the building?
Yeah.
And frankly, in Massachusetts, it's happening like all over the place where we have more historic properties than we do stewards of them. And so it is an interesting question to kind of think of, how are we going to deal with this? There's a variety of approaches we could say. We could say like, it's a dairy barn. Do we have other dairy barns? Yes, we do, but they're all, privately owned, right? Like, and this is owned by a nonprofit who's willing to sort of partner with us to preserve it, so, we could say like, this is what a dairy barn looked like. And, knowing them, that as they go through and excavate, if there are milk cans or any artifacts or anything, they'll be sharing those with, the town, with Historic Society, Historic Commission, to say like, this is part of our legacy as a town, that had a significant dairy farm, part of its operation for hundreds of years. And, and so it's there. I think that's the way I would kind of delineate and say like, yes, we don't have it, to Christine's point,
Right.
totally perfect at this point and airtight, but I think we have like a partner who's, shown themselves to be good stewards and preservationists, and and an opportunity that is here right now.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
Thanks. Any other questions on that particular project? Yeah, go ahead, Nancy.
So the Historic Commission or the Historical Society, who exactly?
Yeah.
they-
So
they
can
were
I
in
beg
favor-
the indulgence?
in
Is
favor
it the
of this?
historic commission? Right? Is that the right term? It's a historic commission, which is not the historical society. So the historical society is the nonprofit that
Yeah.
runs the museum
Yeah.
and does different things, but the historic commission is a town-appointed board that has a much bigger purview in terms of historic restrictions and so forth, where the historic society does more activities and preserves specific properties. Like to
But
give a
the-
good example, the Johnson Cottage, right? The rules about renovating that are held by the historic commission, while the historical society runs the operations inside.
But the Historic Commission recommended doing this. Is that
Yes.
correct? Okay. And then one kind of like related question is, again, kind of goes to not the specific project, but just more like the balancing all the money. So why is there only 10, I know the 10% is the minimum for the affordable housing, but why is it only 10%? Is it because the housing authority, or who I guess it would be, didn't request
Right.
anything specific, so this is just the default because you didn't get any specific request?
Right, so let's just imagine a hypothetical year where we had a $10 million, just to make the numbers easy. We would have to put $1 million towards each thing and hold it aside, right? So every year we have to make sure that we're holding that money aside. So if we had 0 historic projects, right, this year, and say we're having, and we had $10 million, we'd still have to put $1 million aside in funds and kind of hold those to be used for affordable housing or open space or whatever. So, so we did not get anything from the Housing Authority this year in terms of that. And so what we decided to do was go with our full 10% allotment to the Affordable Housing Trust, because it's much more flexible in terms of being able to disperse funds throughout the year. So if they saw an opportunity to buy a house that was on the open market and they have the money in their bank account, they can do it. If not, if they had to wait until town meeting, you can imagine like as a homeowner or somebody, inheriting a property and wanting to do something with affordable housing, you might not be able to hang on for 9 or 10 months to see what happens at town meeting with your application. But if the Affordable Housing Trust has it in their coffers, then they can act, quickly.
So does it mean that the Affordable Housing Trust is not really doing much in terms of new properties, the fact that they didn't request anything, or it means that they're working down a balance that they already have?
So they have some funds, and also, they are opportunistic. So they have to find a willing buyers. And
Yeah.
they might be talking to different people throughout the year, but they don't have anything, they don't have a specific project that was ripe for town meeting.
And in fairness, I think that's a better question for them rather than
Right.
than Bill. I mean, Bill can tell you what they told him, but
Yeah.
All right.
Just one quick question, Bill.
Oh no, Keith, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's late in the day. I guess, so for me, can you clear up what happens to the funds if we haven't identified a project? Do they roll over from year to year, or what?
Right.
Okay. So there's no real disadvantage if we haven't identified a project to which we would spend the 10% in each bucket?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And to be clear, I mean, like the 10% in each bucket, I mean, the 10% for the affordable housing was at $200,000. All of the projects for the cemetery totaled $730,000. That's the request for this year. So it's like if for some reason this piece of it didn't get funded, it's not like we're not.
We lose the benefit of having the money.
No.
Is that where you're heading with this?
No, I'm just saying it doesn't bump up against the 10%. We will still more than satisfy the 10% that needs to go towards this bucket if we do not fund the barn. I'm not saying that we are or are not. I'm just saying that was a question that came up earlier, like, do we need to get up to the 10% for this particular bucket? One is affordable housing, one is historical preservation, and these particular Ridgewood Cemetery Association requests are historic preservation, but there's a lot of other historic preservation things too. The Ridgewood Cemetery, there were approved by the CPC funding of $730,000 this year, and that's really only a piece of the entire historic preservation, so there's a lot more money there. So if you take the big pie, they've got a significant piece of it, well more than the 10%. Is that too confusing? That's way too confusing, isn't it?
So, okay.
Bad explanation.
No, you're fine. So, is there any specific, I think the other particular project that questions came up on was the restoration of the boundary wall. Are there any specific questions to that, or do those questions sort of follow the same logic that has been the conversation that, that Ridgewood is, well, let me not presume. Are there any questions on the boundary wall project, specific to that project?
I think it's like the barn, only even maybe more so. It's not accessible, it's not visible, it's a wall, it's a bunch of stones. They are ubiquitous over New England to have a stone wall. It's a tremendous amount of money to repair a wall. I don't see a lot of value in it. It's hard for me. I mean, with these two projects, I always think of like what else we could be doing with the money, which is not fair to you because that's not what's put in front of you. But I always go back to that. And you look at, and I mean, and the cemetery is gorgeous, and what they've done with it is beautiful. So when you go there, you can see all the work that they've done and all that. These two particular projects, it's not like, oh my gosh, thank goodness that they repaired the beautiful archway in front of the cemetery, or, the walkways are clear, and all of those things. These are in the back, it's like, I have a hard time with that.
I think I'd talk a little bit about, a lot of the funding this year, of the 700,000 plus, 225 is for, the second burial ground, which, they're taking over and sort of stepping in to,
Which I fully support. I think that's
to
a wonderful
take
project,
care of that,
yes.
which is, much more in their wheelhouse. And then I would say too, on the boundary wall, we had similar concerns. We saw a number of pictures and the fact that the wall has been there for a long time. And what we didn't know is that, the wall keeps like getting raided at night, and people steal the stones and take them and install them privately. And so, it has been sort of an ongoing issue of, like, they need to do something about it because the wall is, deteriorated. And it's tough to tell, like, in some places where the neighbor's yard is and where the cemetery is and so forth. So that's what's kind of got us more comfortable with the project, was to say, like, big picture, the wall is historic. It has been there for a long time. And this would sort of, they would cement the stones in place, so we wouldn't be, so it should be maintenance-free after this is done.
In terms of,
I was just going to say, and theft-proof.
Right.
Right. At the very least.
My point, I think making it theft-proof is great. I'm concerned about the rest of the wall then around the entire place. I mean, to get to the point of a master plan of projects, and B, where this particular wall is, which is
Right.
between abutters and something that the public doesn't see versus like the entrance of the place, or I haven't walked it to
Yeah.
and memorize where all the stone walls are, but I'm just wondering, would we rather cement in place stones that are like part of the front entrance of the place and bordering on Salem Street or whatever, like
Yeah, I mean,
more
I'm not the
visible
applicant.
like
I
we're
can
gonna
certainly
spend
say
some
that,
money, is it better spent
Yeah, that's
in-
not, again, I don't think
I
that's not
know,
a question.
I
It's-
know.
It's a tough position for sure, but that's, that's not the application
I
that
guess
came
I was
before.
wondering if, part of the reason of asking you guys to come was to hear more about what your conversation was with the
Right.
applicant. So like, if they said, oh, this is what step one, but we want to do the entire wall at some point to like make sure the whole thing doesn't get rated, I'd be interested to know that.
Right.
So
No, they
anything
said
along
this
those
was,
lines that was shared would be
this is a
helpful.
different wall, different construction than the wall in the front of the cemetery. It's more of, a classical New England stone wall, from what they explained to us. And they said it's consistent with some of the other walls they've repaired over the years that are more, boundary sort of walls than this one.
Did they say if they're going to do this work regardless? Like, if they're gonna do it, in 3 years and they'd get to it sooner, they're gonna, I don't know, just curious if they talked about it otherwise. Okay.
No, I mean, did the specific question come up around the timing of when they were going to do this wall versus anything else? No, we didn't. We were more focused on, is it worth doing at all? Right. Right.
If we don't get this funding, we're not gonna be able to do anything with this barn, and it's,
Right.
Getting
So the
mowed
barn,
down, or
the
did they
barn,
say?
the barn, I can definitely say, like, if they don't do anything with the barn in the near term,
gonna
like
fall
it's
apart.
going to continue to fall apart. That was definitely much more clear cut, and that's what we focused the work on. So it's, it's the structural work to get the barn back up and, sort of solid and waterproof, and get it cleaned out and sort of ready. So this is not like a reconstruction of the barn. This is really like, how can you get the barn?
phase one. Yes. This is phase one, shore up the barn so it doesn't fall in.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Because I was also comparing that to the Stevens Stables, which was less money, and I thought the stables was in not very good shape, so it was curious to me that was less money.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I've been talking about the stables for 10 years, so, and,
Yeah.
and, certainly I certainly understand that, and that's something, again, where we, do I like being in the position where someone comes to me and says, like, if you don't, like, we're in this situation with this structure, and if we don't start to do something to it, it's gonna fall down. Like, we don't like being in that position, and we would like, what is the 5-year plan for the barn? But we get one shot a year to sort of fund what comes up in front of us. And I do agree, like, if we spend money to stabilize the barn this year and we get a historic preservation restriction on it, could they come back and say, like, we need this and this? And, it certainly is true that that's, something that could happen. I'm not going to sit here and say, like, 200,000, you're out of the barn business. It's probably not, right? Like, it's probably going to take a little work. And that's the thing that we sort of struggled with, to say, like, okay, it's been deemed historically significant. They have a preservation, at least they have a theory of preservation, right, in terms of it's going to be used to store this equipment, and it'll get, the attention and the use that will keep it, in good shape. And I think that's where we said, like, okay, for this, that makes sense. And I'd contrast that with the stables, which I know have been, a long time sort of puzzle, and I know, like, there are a lot of new partners, and I don't know much about the entire thing, but I would say, you know, it's kind of similar. And with the stables, we don't have that.
Right, but the stables we own. And the
Right.
stables, you know,
Yeah.
are going to be used for public use at some point. So I have no
Right.
problem with the stables. In fact, I'm really excited to do that. Again, I'm coming back to public use.
Right.
But anyway, one last thing, you didn't.
I'm more talking like life cycle, right?
Right,
Like
right.
on the life cycle thing, this is the first stage in the life
Yeah.
cycle.
And you didn't mention this as being, you know, discussed as a condition or whatever for the barn, but I'm assuming based on your other comments that you think that the applicant would be amenable to, as you say, sharing the artifacts that might be uncovered, like the milk jugs, with the historical society or whatever, and, you know, incorporating, I know like at the elementary school level, the kids learn about the different historic structures in North Andover and go to visit some of them and whatever, maybe there's some
Right.
inclusion of that, whatever, some
Yeah.
things that will at least help us get some public
Yeah. No,
you know,
I think so.
use out of it.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely like our goal in sort of doing this. You know?
Okay, I think all my questions are answered.
Any other questions for Mr. Callahan?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Nancy, yeah.
I have more too.
Nancy, when I asked that, I assumed you're going to ask.
Should have asked the first time that you came, but, so the wall is about, do you know about how many feet that restores?
shoot.
Is it like 10 feet, 100 feet, 1,000 feet?
I can look it up.
Approximately? Is it like,
It's-
is it like 1/4, like one side of
Could it
the?
potentially be 550?
That sounds about right. Let me
550
see.
feet?
I think
I heard it was
three
that's quite-
butters, so it's three
That's quite a bit.
butter
Yeah.
lots.
Okay, so 3
I can
lots.
look it up. I have it in,
Oh,
you know, I'm sure it's in the
just look for a rough
application.
idea. So about,
I have
about
on good
3.
authority, it's 550 feet.
Okay, all right.
So you're.
That sounds about right.
And then, thank you, and then the last question I have, sorry, is that the percent allocation, it's not a percent of the balance, it's a percent of what's being given out this year, right? So is that correct? Like the
Right, right. So
10%
every
or-
year we have to set aside 10% of what we get for that year. And then they're,
Not for the year. Okay,
Right.
So it's 10% of what the incoming is. So I was just wondering, like, if you change one of these other numbers, does it change the 10% to affordable housing? But it
No,
sounds like it
so,
doesn't. Okay,
no.
okay, thanks.
I do have another
Go for it.
question for you. Not on walls and not on
No,
barns.
no.
My question is, considering the middle school fields project, you know, that large project, and I know that the CBC had put forth a fair amount of funds for that, and it's got tangled in litigation, which, you know, hopefully will be resolved. But that aside, have you been anticipating, because I know eventually it will be resolved, and those funds that are set aside will be hopefully spent on that. But it's fairly likely that the project is going to cost a lot more than that because so much time has gone by. Does that seem like a reasonable assumption because of, you know, materials have increased so much and all those things? And I just wondering if there is, this is one of the other things that I think that possibly could be funded, even though they, you know, we can't even come to you and ask for those funds
Right,
yet,
right.
because, you know, it's not within the scope to even ask it because the original funds haven't been. but,
I
like,
would say like we're comfortable that we have enough funds.
enough to fund.
Like in general.
A little bit
Yeah.
of a different, I think that's a good question. Let me ask you a little different. Do you have a process in place for the contingency that if the project survives litigation and moves forward, that, you know, it would need to be refunded or supplementally funded in some way? Do you have a process that you do?
It would be a supplemental application. So we've had this happen like with the library steps, you
Yep.
know, so we funded some and we had to fund additional because they didn't have enough to get the job done. So.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, that seems like that will be significant. Well, that's good to know. It would be really nice to see that go forward. Okay.
All right, any additional questions? That's my turn to say I have one more additional question. But I asked that question knowing it. Yeah, thank you. So I was not able to be here in person for the last time the CPC was here. So I did subsequently watch it, but let me ask you, are there any projects that you didn't get funded this year?
Yes.
Could you go over those quickly? Or not
Sure. In
quickly?
terms of applications that came in front of us that
Yeah.
we didn't fund, the Trinitarian Church came for restoration that they had to perform, self-perform on their own because of like a ceiling collapse. And ever since the Acton decision about funds to religious organizations and, sort of set up a very tricky thing, we decided we could not fund that just because it was right in like the sanctuary. And so it was pretty clear that the area had a religious use, and that would, given the legal environment, that would not be an appropriate project for us to fund. So that was one. We did not fund the David Neal painting at the Stevens Estate, and I think that came down to the fact that we had had the same proposal a few years before, and basically asked a number of questions, and none of those questions were resolved when it came back to us. So, and we felt like, in terms of like the ripeness question, like we could do some more due diligence and come back with a proposal that we get comfortable with. I would say those two, and then we also had the Sutton Pond Preservation project come to us, which we haven't taken action on either way. And we have one more meeting, and I think if we had a 3-3 decision. We didn't have all our members there, and so we'll come back and take a look at that one last time. So that one didn't get sort of up or down at this point. But those other two, we decided
So that's a
not to.
potential project that could come back.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. All right, great, thank you. Appreciate it. Everybody good? All right, thanks, Bill. Thank you very
Can
much.
I
Appreciate
say
it.
one thing overall, though?
You, of course.
Okay. All right. So, I think, in terms of looking at this, like in the big picture sense, the CPC funding, we'll have a CPC report, and we'll have sort of a list of projects and a line item. And I, lined out, bit by bit. And so, like, I think, I can certainly understand, and, when I sat in those seats, I certainly, asked the exact same questions that you guys were asking, So I think one thing to think about is just sort of big picture. I think it's perfectly, legitimate. All great questions and so forth and so on, and we certainly want all that done. I think CPC works really hard to sort of build a lot of credibility and buy-in from lots of stakeholders in town. We try to get out in front of people and raise our profile and so forth and so on. And so, like, just when you think about the entire package, like, certainly, we could, we have one more meeting and so forth, but, like, in a sense, as a committee, I know you have the power to recommend favorable, unfavorable, or no action. And so just when I think about that, like, I would just hope that we could, sort of be judicious about how this whole thing works and how it sort of fits together, So I think, we just want to make sure that we preserve this. And if you guys have a very strong message you want to send to us and send back to us, we will certainly listen to it. But, like, by the same token, I think, like, if the committee were to say, like, we recommend unfavorable action on the CPC warrant article, I think that's a big public message. And, like, certainly, there's a larger public policy question of, is the CPC committee, is the CPC, is the CPA tax and so forth and so on, is that good for our town? And I think, like, that's a discussion, we can certainly have. I just want to make sure that we're, that we're clear about it. So, like, we're listening, and we're open and, able and so forth. And, I hope we can, sort of see this thing through. And if you have any questions, in terms of the process for us, you want to hear more from us or hear from us at different times, like, we certainly know, and every year we fight the battle of, like, how early should we be asking for applications? How much time do we need to do our due diligence? And we've pushed it back. Like, I certainly sat on FinCom when, when the CPC came in on the day of town meeting and said, here's our stuff, because we just finished voting on it, We've tried to push it back so that you guys have, everybody has more input into the process. You know, and if you know, that's certainly something we were thinking about. We tried to do like a pre-application process this year, you know, that was voluntary. It wasn't mandatory, but to say people come in October and November, and we can ask 10 questions and get 10 answers by February. You know, so we're certainly, as a group, very amenable to, you know, having a conversation about how we make this work.
From my perspective, I can't tell how much I appreciate that you are coming before us so soon and give us the opportunity to quiz you and torture you with things, you know, to just air things out. I think it's a really good process. I also was very appreciative of the amount of information that was online that I could find. I mean, didn't recall that before, so it was just, I was like, this is so transparent. I mean, you had everything up there. So that's very much appreciated, that we can go and find out what's going on, you know, and what's going on with the money, because you've done great things, but it's a lot of money. And it is, you know, taxes coming out of, I can't imagine eliminating it. I mean, look what we've done with the money. It's been great for preservation of land, all those things, you know. So as a committee, I think you've done a really good job. And recently, over the past several years, I think it's improved considerably, or just changed with requests. So, but you just brought up one other issue that I have thought about the CPC. And you say about like what policy or what could we be doing different. I know that senior housing isn't something that falls under the purview, or you're not allowed to actually give money into senior housing. So collectively, as a group, as a committee, do you think it would be, is that you?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. She's supposed to be home now. Do you?
Not a timer, just
Not a
for
timer,
everyone.
just so that we know. Would that it be something that you might consider actually pursuing our legislative body to say, what do we have to do to be able to put some of this money towards senior housing? You know, to change the requirements, to literally put a request to the state of Massachusetts, the powers to be, to say, you know, can we change these rules? Can we do this? Because it seems we have a lot of senior housing in town. I don't even know how all of it is owned, but I do know that there's a lot of upkeep that needs to be done. And I also know that there's a lot of money that's sitting out there that hasn't been spent because of the pandemic. I know Brian was explaining that to us, that materials weren't available, so there's all kinds of work that didn't get done, and then it's like, can we do the work?
No,
And-
I mean,
And so that's
certainly, you know,
something that seems worthy, but
right.
it's nothing you can do about it right now.
Right,
Things
right.
would have to change.
No, I'd certainly like to know more about that
Yeah.
senior part, because I know that when we did the comprehensive study of the developments in town, I may not know the housing authority designation for each project,
Yeah.
but we certainly hit most of the projects in town. And so we're certainly willing to, I want to learn about that, if that's something that we can't do, and figure out how we could.
Figured
Try to do
how to
it.
maybe add that to the package. So that'd be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Really appreciate it. Oh, Bill, when's your next meeting? When's the meeting you referenced?
April 12th.
Perfect. Yeah. No, cool, thanks. All right. I think the next item on our agenda is a discussion of the warrant letter. I would I don't know that we can discuss it more than just to say, please get your parts in if you haven't got them in, because we got to turn this thing around by the 12th, okay? So if you haven't gotten it in, please get it in. And then hey, Stan, I was going to offer public comment. It's not on the agenda, but I was going to offer it if you care. You don't need to. Go for it. We'll move on to public comment. Go ahead, Stan.
Stan Lippert, 43 Stonecleave Road. I just wanted to offer a few more clarifying comments about Historical Commission versus Historical Society. The North Andover Historical Society is a private, nonprofit organization, self-funded, that tries to preserve and present the history of North Andover. The Historical Commission is Mr. Callahan pointed out, is a town commission that is responsible for matters historical about our community. One of its principal duties is to impose demolition delays on historic properties if they think that that might help preserve them. So that's one of their primary responsibilities. And just to clarify, the Historical Commission was asked by the Community Preservation Commission to look at these two issues, the barn and the wall. And it didn't recommend anything. It just said, the commission said, that they were in fact historically significant, but not what to do about it.
So they
right?
didn't say, we should preserve it, they were just
They
stating
did,
the
they
fact.
did not say that, yes.
That,
The
so it
facts
wasn't-
were.
It wasn't like a okay.
It was not a recommendation.
That's a
It
good
was merely a statement
point.
of fact
Yeah.
that they are potentially historically significant.
Yeah.
The barn and the wall to a lesser
Yeah.
extent, right? So I just wanted to make that.
Oh, I appreciate that.
Clear,
And
right?
just as a point of clarification, Stan, do you perhaps sit on the Historical Commission board?
Actually, I do.
So
just
you
to-
can speak with authority
Yes.
in your
Yes,
position.
yes. And you all may not be surprised to hear that the Historical Commission had the same kind of debate about these issues that you've had, so.
Okay.
But
Good, that's helpful. Thank you, Stan, appreciate it. All right, so just to circle back to the discussion of the warrant letter. Thank you, no problem, Stan.
Sorry, before you move on to the warrant letter, so we're not going to discuss our opinion on
No,
the CP, okay.
Yeah, hold on. So, if you bear with me, please. No, it's okay. So, we're gonna discussion on the warrant letter article. So, please, if you haven't gotten your stuff into Chris and I, please get it in, because we have to get our final copy in on the 12th, and we need time to put the stuff together. So please get it in. Now, we do have one remaining article that we have to give a recommendation on, and that is the CPC article. So in order to get that recommendation in the warrant book, we need to take a vote before April 12th. Okay, so we'll have to have a meeting before April 12th to have our recommendation in the warrant book at town meeting, right? We can certainly get up and say what our recommendation is that day, but for folks who look at it online and read it at their seats at town meeting, which I think it's important, we really should. So between that and we traditionally like to vote our sort of all, that we all agree with a final letter before it goes to town meeting, or before it goes to the warrant. We're going to need one more meeting, right? So I'm hopeful that people can make a meeting on April 10th, which is a week from today. I know that the select board will have this room, so we'll have to try and find another, which is, as long as I get enough nods here that April 10th would work.
April 10th works.
Yeah, okay. Then I will work with Jillian to endeavor to find a place for us to meet so that we can have those two votes. Now, having said all of that, would anybody like to discuss further their feelings on the CPC article?
Well, I just have a question. Why don't we vote on it tonight? Is it because it's not on the agenda? Is that why we can't do it tonight? Because I'm just thinking, well, it's fresh in our minds.
So we could. There are still, so on our last meeting, we sort of determined that I would go back and try and find some options for us. So I've not run down all of the options. I've got a few, but there is one more option that I need to wrestle on. I guess that's only.
Only if we're not all.
That's only if we're not all on the same page, I guess. So, tell me what your thoughts are.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so this is more of a procedural question. And I don't know, is this one of the things that you are chasing down? But is it are we only able to vote up and down, or do we have the ability to parse out the things that we do not want to vote favorably on?
So
Or unfavorably on?
I have been told that we can parse out the individual projects within the article. So we could say, we would need separate motions to do this, but we could say, a motion to, to vote favorably on these projects within this article, and, that we don't recommend these projects. Personally, I would feel more comfortable getting one more person to tell me that's,
Before, okay.
you know what I mean? I like to have two good sources, you know what I mean? Because I don't want us to do something and then have it come back to bite us in the butt.
So my follow-up question to that is, sorry, just want to make sure. So, new to the process.
Yeah.
Right? So what's the larger implications, both procedurally, but then also from a perception standpoint, if we were to vote down
So
certain
if
parts,
we
assuming that
voted-
we have the ability to do?
So, so procedurally, there's no issue, right? I mean, we can vote, if it's the will of this committee to recommend to town meeting that we are not, in favor of that article, we can do that, and that's not a problem. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. It certainly has happened, maybe not for the CPC article, but for articles throughout town meeting, right? That's not a problem. What the implications are in a broader context, I don't know that I could say.
Opine on.
Yeah, I don't know.
Fair enough.
It's kind of like this. It's like as Bill was saying, the CPC, the committee works hard to do what they do, and they're a really great group, and they've really worked hard to have a lot of integrity in their process. So us, taking their whole warrant article and saying no to everything there is it can be perceived as being critical of the committee. I mean, so you have to think about that when you do it. I mean, and the thing is like, but those are the shady gray areas. But it really just is a line in the warrant. In the past, I've been on a lot of other boards, it's happened with the school committee budget.
Right.
The whole school committee budget. And in what the finance committee is saying then is like, we really don't have a lot of faith in how they cobbled together their budget. And that's what that says. It doesn't mean that it's going to be, not going to be funded or any of that. I mean, town meeting can say, the finance committee, we need this money for our schools. You guys are nuts. And that happens. I mean, that's town meeting. You really don't know. But it's just as a board, you have to think about, like, those are the kind of messages that you're sending when it's a sweeping vote like that.
So for instance, and I don't want to put too much weight, I don't want to, pretend too much weight in what the finance committee's recommendations are.
It's not as weighty as,
Right,
but
but there certainly is a scenario that I could foresee that the finance committee says no and town meeting says, oh, well, if the finance committee said no, then we should vote no. Well, then, because all of these projects are in one article, because we voted unfavorable, because we didn't like two projects,
Yeah, that means
and the
nothing.
town meeting says,
Exactly.
oh, we like what the finance committee had to say, we're going to vote, all of the other projects will not get funded either.
Yeah, yeah,
So I think that's really
that's a tough thing.
what we got to weigh here is that,
Well, the other scenario is someone could propose an amendment, right?
Yeah,
That is-
or-
that
or
is-
town meeting,
Yeah.
Yes, that.
yes, somebody could absolutely
Yeah.
propose an amendment to pull out two projects.
And
Or
that might have to happen whether we parse it out or not. I'm not sure. But the ability for us to parse it out is a much clearer message to the town that we support the CPC in all these projects, but we are not supporting it in these two particular ones, or three, whatever we decide.
People don't propose an amendment though unless, well, that's, the question I have is the timing of the amendment, right? Usually, if a board proposes an amendment to their own article, then it is done before you even vote on the article.
Right.
Yep.
But if it's just a citizen proposing an amendment, most likely we'll vote on the article first.
Yes,
So
right.
the implications of our yes or no vote are already,
Taken into account.
taken into account.
Yep.
Before, so,
Ken?
Well, just from a procedural standpoint, could we put forth a motion for favorable recommendation, just to kind of see where we're at, and then when we get to vote, offer amendments at that point, internal to the like an amendment to our.
We could just take a poll of this committee.
Oh, I guess I'm not fresh on my Robert's rules, and I want to make sure we don't,
We could
but,
definitely do a poll, an informal consensus. I mean, that's, what's the pleasure of the board? A straw vote, there you go, that has no impact on what we actually put in the warrant.
So,
Straw vote.
Yeah.
Straw vote. It's
So-
not, it's
so
not
what is-
binding, it's just to see where people stand.
right, so if that's what you'd like to do, we can do
would.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's,
It might be a non-issue if we.
right.
that's why I
Yeah,
said.
yeah,
we could
good
do it
point.
tonight, you
Yeah.
know,
I got no problem with that, so go ahead, Nancy.
So I go first?
Yeah? No
Um,
question.
I actually support the barn. I think, it seems like a reasonable amount of money to do restoration, preservation of a barn, and I feel like they had good logic for why they want to do it. It's a historical building. I like the logic of if they're using it, it's going to be kept up. Anyway, so I would want to keep that one. The stone wall, I'm a little bit more on the fence on that one.
No pun intended.
I'm on the wall.
Ted?
I'm okay with the whole thing.
Okay. Regina?
I'm convinced on the barn to be supportive. The stone wall, I'm also on the fence. I could be
Okay.
supportive though. Yes.
Neither of the barn nor the stone wall seems to me like a, knowing what I know about the process, neither one of them I'm completely compelled to vote favorable on.
Okay, so you would,
He's no on the.
you're no, yeah, okay.
Thank you for.
Yeah,
translating
no, I
for
got
me.
you. I was getting there. I was getting there.
It's easy for me.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Chris.
I'm not gonna ask why either, I can only imagine.
I'm also a no for the barn and the wall.
Brianna?
I'm a no for both. I'm a yes for all.
All right, well,
So that's 4 of us who say yes for the barn and 2 of us who say yes for the wall.
that's 5 no's on the wall, right? And,
Wait, did you vote?
no.
Oh, oh, how convenient.
Well, so I would be inclined,
Who were the 5 no's for the wall? Wait, you said
Nancy,
no for the wall.
you,
I'm
1.
Well, I said I was on the fence. I'm
Okay, all right, so
wishy-washy.
you're not sure, but you're not a solid yes. That's why, I'm sorry, I couldn't.
Okay.
I
couldn't
counted
do-
it as a no too.
Okay.
Now, you're always allowed to change your mind later, but this is,
Yeah.
this is the sense of the board. But what about you? Oh, Chair.
So, I'm inclined to support all of the projects I can.
Yeah, I do worry about the implications of us cherry picking and what kind of precedent that's setting.
True what he said, at town meeting, people could vote it down, and then we're gonna be like, oh, it's because of us.
Yeah, but the cherry pick, actually, that's what's,
So, right.
pulling 2 things out means that people aren't looking at like, oh, they're unfavorable of everything and.
No.
No, I know, but that's if we could do that.
Yeah.
We don't know.
So I think we can. I mean,
I think we
I
can.
feel strongly that we can. So, you know what, let me go back to that. If that's what we want to do, I'm good with that. So if we want to say, move to recommend favorable action on the following projects, and then move to recommend unfavorable action on the following projects.
And we can wait, those of you who are still on the fence,
So,
we don't have to do that.
no, so that, I mean, my recommendation would be, we have to meet again for the letter anyway. So why not just put this off and let everybody have one more week of thought
Yeah, that's reasonable.
on it, and then we could do this at the next meeting. And that gives me an opportunity to get my second, my second source to make sure that we can do it this way. I'm 99.9% sure we can.
So when did the select board meet? When does the select?
Monday.
Monday, okay. So it would be, I think it would be, if all of you could,
Well, we're gonna be meeting on Monday.
oh, we can't watch them. Oh, we're going to be doing it at the same time.
Yep.
Oh, true. Well, let's call up our select board members.
So, I think, we could, yeah. All right, so that's where we are. Is everybody good?
Yeah, one just last thing, from my standpoint, I defer to,
Are you talking to the camera?
no,
Oh, okay.
I was looking at the 2 people that aren't there.
I didn't know if you were going right to the camera, like this was a personal, like, boom. Yeah, exactly.
I've been through a lot.
No, okay. Whatever you want to do.
I defer to the people who have spent a lot of time on
Yeah.
these issues and have they've flushed through, they've looked at all the angles.
I
They
agree.
understand the money situation, and they both seem like really smart and dedicated people. So I think they're doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah.
So that's why I get.
I agree.
Well, I think the other context is just how much money there is still out there too. I mean, 6 million unencumbered, so it's not like these are taking away from other projects.
Right.
Not at the
Right.
moment, not at the moment.
Right.
I mean, to me, my whole thing is there's so many other things out there that are so worthy, that having money squirreled away for these really, really worthy cause, and one of them is affordable housing, which would take a significant amount of money. I mean, maybe there's not property out there because we're looking at property that costs $1 million. I mean, I don't know, but I feel very strongly about that.
But
And
they
I-
don't know either, right?
They don't. I mean, no, I'm not,
Yeah.
they have a very difficult
Yeah.
task in front of them, and they have to go by the rules. They have people that come in front of them who, have good pitches. That's just my personal feeling about it. And also, the senior housing, I mean, the cemetery's gorgeous. I know the senior housing isn't nearly as beautiful, and I have problems with that. And they can't even fix that yet. Maybe later.
Can we, another procedural question?
Go for it.
If next week, let's just say those of us who said we were on the fence of the wall switch to be supportive, then it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 supportive of all projects. So then it would be just favorable. We would go back to,
Yeah.
like, if we started the whole night voting,
Yes,
cherry
yes,
picking,
yes.
but we ended up
Yeah,
that
go back
way,
to-
we would go back to just favorable action on the
Correct.
article.
Procedurally, like,
And then you guys could
if
make
procedurally,
a
I could
dissenting
make a
opinion.
motion that we not, it depends on the wording of the motion. I'd have to be prepared to make that motion and do it that way. If I decided I didn't want to do that way, that we just wanted to do an overall, you know what I'm saying.
And
It's-
certainly, anybody can step off the rostrum at any time and speak as a private citizen and say that they don't support or support whatever they want.
What I was hoping to hear was, what was I missing? To your point, and I don't disagree, and I know they've done the diligence necessary to come up with a favorable action, and I wanted to hear what I was missing. What was I missing on the stone wall? Because they obviously had the same questions. I didn't hear anything that said, hey, this is why we're doing, and that's why I asked, does the money go back if we don't spend it? And that's, I didn't hear that part of the pitch that would make me go, oh, okay, I get it.
Yeah.
And I agree that the stone wall, yes, you replace it now, and you've made the effort to make sure that it's a bit more permanent. But then what happens to the other part of the wall, right? And so that's what I didn't hear, and that's what gives me a bit of pause. But having said that, I'm still open to be persuaded. But that was my, I wanted to hear what was I missing?
Their committee was split also. I mean, to be fair.
On the wall.
On the wall. Well, there was a lot of discussion on the barn, too. I mean,
but it was unanimous
it was
at the end.
at the end. But, watching that meeting was very informative.
Okay.
You can go on YouTube and watch it. I mean, you have to sit through a meeting again. But that's what I did. And it's interesting because there's a lot of, they've been doing this a while.
Well,
So-
I will say this too, there were some folks who were originally against the wall, who by the end of the meeting voted in favor of the wall.
I wish I could have heard. So I did start to go to the YouTube and look for the CPC thing. Never got to finish it, but and maybe that's what I need to do
Yeah.
is to hear the deliberation around how they got to yes, and maybe that will help better inform my decision.
Yeah.
Do you happen to remember the meeting date for when they discussed that?
There weren't very many. It's on YouTube, but there
Yeah,
weren't very many.
there's a,
There's like-
They only meet once a month?
hold on, they
I
usually.
don't remember, but it's like, when you go to the CAM site, I couldn't
Okay,
find
I'll
it, but
find
when I went on YouTube, and I actually did a search on YouTube for North Andover CPC, or North Andover Community Preservation Committee, that's what I searched.
And there are only very few, right?
Right, that's right, and they came up with a couple different dates, so that was like, oh, there it
If
is.
you go to
And-
North Andover CAM and you go to playlists, North Andover CAM, and I'm not just saying this because they're in the room, they are awesome.
They are awesome, but when I looked for it, they didn't have it live yet.
Argument.
I saw a smile. He's listening. Sustainability Commission. Well, I can get it for you after. But in any event, all right. So we're good. So we'll find a time and a place on Monday that works, and we'll sew this thing up. The letter, which means you got to get your pieces in, and this vote, and then we'll be good.
Could we go to Jamie's or something?
Make a motion. All right. Can we have an adjournment motion, please? Thank you, Eva. Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. We are adjourned. Thank you very much, Cam.